Good to see you,
all your
Audrey.
own.
Yeah,
That's
good to
right.
see you too. And congratulations, Joshua, on your nuptials.
That's right. That's right. It's been a very eventful,
Congratulations.
very eventful
Congratulations.
few days.
With really
All right, y'all.
lovely.
It was lovely. It looks like we are live on Facebook now. So
Okay.
we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna welcome everybody who is tuning in on Facebook right now. My name is JP Reynolds. I'm your host for this conversation, which is a behind the scenes conversation and celebration of the 25th anniversary of American Legacy. It has been a long and beautiful journey for the brand. And tonight we're gonna be having a really dope conversation with some of the really influential key foundational folks from the brand. I should say the brand is gotten into a lot of different places now. I'm the son of the founder, which makes it really special for me. I'm also a music artist, and I'm the host of Memoir Noir, which is a program on American Legacy Network. Um, so I'm really proud and I'm really excited to be hosting this conversation with three very important people to the history of this brand. I'm going to introduce them to you now. We're gonna have a conversation just about the foundation, about where we are now, where we may be going next. So on tonight's call, we have the founder, my father, Rodney J. Reynolds, the founder of American Legacy. I could talk about him ad nauseum, and I will spare you that. So I'll get to our other two very special esteemed folks as well. Tonight we also have Timothy C. Forbes, who is former president and COO of Forbes, as well as currently the president of Highlander Management Incorporated. And we also have with us former editor of American Legacy, Audrey Peterson. And again, welcome to everybody here tonight. And we're just gonna go ahead and get started and get into the conversation. And I'm gonna throw it to the founder of American Legacy, Rodney J. Reynolds. I just wanna know how you came into contact with Forbes and give me some backstory. Give us some backstory on how this thing got started.
Well, JP, good to be with you and on this special conversation tonight about American Legacy, the brand in general, and celebrating our 25th year of existence, the brand
Yeah.
itself. Um, Actually, it was pretty interesting how I even came in contact with um, Forbes, or even found out about Forbes. Um, I had a friend actually who worked in the publishing industry in New York for a number of years, had come to Cleveland, and that's where I met her. Her name was Ida Kuhane. And Ida had gone back to New York, read an article that was in the New York Times, and she knew that I was out on the hunt to try to find a partner to publish a national magazine. I think in 1992, I had gone out to California and met with Disney Publishing. Actually, the guy that I met with Disney Publishing was a guy named John Skipper, who actually eventually became the president of ESPN. But I met with him, I think, in 1992. And Ida sent me this article in 1993, and I followed up and I read within the article that Forbes published a magazine called American Heritage. And so, when you're out on the hunt trying to find a partner, trying to find money, you look under every nook and cranny. And so I said, well, let me reach out to American Heritage and at Forbes. And I did reach out, and I think Tim initially sent me a letter back and said, well, our resources are in other areas. And so, but I'd be happy to meet with you. He wrote me a letter back that said, I'd be happy to meet with you. He may not remember that, but I did receive that letter. And so I said, well, at least they owe me one meeting. So I did the thing that a salesperson would do. I called and I said I was going to be in New York on this day. That day happened to be in February of 1994. I was able to get a meeting with Tim. And actually, I flew to New York in a snowstorm. I had two meetings that day. One was at the first meeting was at New York Times Publishing Group, and then that afternoon I had a meeting with Forbes and met with Tim. And something about that meeting was totally different than the meeting I had earlier in the day at New York Times Publishing Group. During the course of the meeting, I gave my pitch about publishing a national magazine that celebrated Black history and culture. And I think what Tim liked about the initial pitch was what I outlined as my distribution strategy, which was to distribute this magazine to Black churches around the country, utilizing that as one of the distribution mechanisms, which I had utilized for years as I was publishing a number of magazines in Cleveland, Ohio. I always utilized Black churches as a distribution point. And so after hearing my initial pitch, he then called in Scott Masterson, and he's called in Ed Hughes, and both of them came in, and I kind of went through it again. The meeting ended. I flew back to Cleveland, and about a week later, I received a call from Scott Masterson to ask if I could come back up to New York, this time on their dime. The first time was on my dime, but the second trip was on their dime, and I did go back up to New York. We had a number of meetings, and by I think April, we actually had an agreement in hand, and we started hitting the ground working on the development of American Legacy magazine,
Right.
which was in 1994 that we began that journey.
Right. Yeah, I want to pull in Mr. Tim Forbes here, right? You wrote that letter, you sent that letter. I would love to know what was going through your mind. I know my dad kind of just mentioned the distribution strategy as maybe a prompting feature, but what was it that made it special? What was it that made you send that letter?
Well, it was a combination of things. Rodney has gone through it pretty well, I think. And when I first got the letter from him, he outlined very broadly the concept for the magazine, which I found intriguing and I thought could be very important. American Heritage was and is still, but was at that time, we were a magazine about American history. And we had a couple of offshoots of American Heritage at that point. And I thought that a magazine celebrating African American history and culture would be inherently interesting and actually inherently important. So I thought, okay, even though this is not what was something that we had thought about or a direction we had thought about going, was intrigued enough so that asked Rodney to come in when he was in town, which he suddenly was going to be in town a week and a half or so later. When we met, as he recounted, in addition to the subject matter, he talked a bit about the distribution. And I found that tremendously intriguing because one of the biggest obstacles to starting any venture is distribution. And that idea seemed to solve in significant measure in what I thought was I'd never heard of that particular idea before. So I thought it was very creative. And also I liked the idea of distributing through churches. So that combination, I found really intriguing. And that's when I called Scott Masterson, who was our general manager, and Ed Hughes, who was doing all the ad sales, in to hear this idea. And after Rodney left, the three of us talked about it further. And we thought actually quite early on, and Rodney can recount our visits to Detroit, but we thought, gee, this was something that General Motors might well be interested in. And we thought that because we had long relationship with them. They not only were advertisers in Forbes and in American Heritage, but they had also sponsored a couple of other, if you will, themed magazines that we had done with them. And I thought that this just might appeal to them. So Rodney came back in, we got the agreement, and then we went about trying to raise the funding through advertising sales to kick off a pilot issue. And Rodney can, as I say, he can recount those visits out to Detroit that we took together.
Yeah.
Well, those were, we did go out to Detroit, made a number of calls. What was surprising was the reaction that we received initially from General Motors. I mean, we certainly wanted them to participate as an advertiser in the magazine, in the pilot issue. But Karen Ritchie, who we met with at that particular time at GM, she came back and she said, after listening to our presentation, how can we have a bigger role in this product, in this magazine? And then she said, well, can we have category exclusivity? And after we got up off the floor, we said, we determined, she wanted to know what that would look like, and we came back with a set number of pages to be in the pilot issue as the exclusive automotive advertiser. And she approved it, and we were off to the races.
And that amounted, over the course of doing the 4 issues a year, that those pages amounted to roughly, as I recall, about $1 million a year. So it really did give the means to launch American Legacy. And I think they deserve some real credit for the foresight. As I say, it's the kind of thing that I thought might appeal to them when we did the deal with Rodney, and it turned out that it worked, which things don't always quite so smoothly as that one did.
Yeah, that's real. There's so many nuggets that y'all just are dropping, and I have a checklist of things in my head right now that I want to kind of get to. Tim, you just said something about the distribution channel that reminds me a little bit about even the content of American Legacy, which is that, I hadn't thought about that before, right? And one of the things over the course of the American Legacy brand is people encounter stories that they've never heard of, right? A lot of times we hear the big names, we hear the big stories, rightly so. But American Legacy sometimes covers the nooks and the crannies of, Black history and Black culture. And I would love to hear, Audrey's perspective on, that approach, right? And from the point of content and these stories and finding these little, not little at all, right? But lesser known stories and narratives from the culture. What was that process like, especially early on? What was that? What was the impact of doing that work?
Well, I came on in November of 1998, so there had been a couple of years of publication by then. And I could tell you that one of my it was more like an interview test, an interview question with the senior editors at American Heritage, because we were working together on Legacy being the sister magazine of Heritage. They all interviewed me, and one of the things that I had to do is come back with at least 15 to 20 ideas for upcoming magazines to put in the lineups and story ideas, and happily the job that I was about to leave was at Reader's Digest General Books, and I was in the history group, so I did editing of history books. And a lot of Reader's Digest General Books are overall American history. So you put them together. Some of them are targeted specifically, but when you do like Our Glorious Century or This American Story, or you're going to have to tell the whole story of everyone. So I would try to stuff as many African American history stories into these books as possible. It never happened sometimes. So once in a while I get one here and there, but then there will be all these stories that I didn't get that I would put in my file. So when I showed up for my interview, I had a ton of stories, but what was interesting, and some of them were very obscure little stories, some of them were more well known, but that's what was such a great fit in terms of me coming there, was that's what American Legacy was about some of the bigger stories, but lesser known parts of a story, like a more, we knew that, for instance, George Washington had slaves, but we didn't know, the backstory of, the story of the enslaved people. But then there were these wonderful things like the African-American silversmith from the early 18th century, or the architect, the Black architect in the South in the antebellum. And so I think there was just as much joy of our readers opening up the magazine and seeing these stories and not, they hadn't learned them in school, they weren't in any of the books. And you really had to dig, but after a while we were often overwhelmed with proposals and manuscripts as it caught on and people knew about it. There was, constant flow.
Yeah. Well, that was always one of the things, it was like a common thread and comments that we would receive from readers and from individuals, is that every time they picked up the magazine, they learned something that they didn't necessarily know. And one conversation I recall very intimately was a number of years ago. I was out in Dallas, Texas, at a reception that was put on by one of our advertisers, American Airlines. And Bill Gray, former congressman, a Baptist minister, former head of the United Negro College Fund, he and I were talking, and he said, one of the best thing that I love about American Legacy is that every time I pick it up, I learn something. And I'm like, well, here's this guy who is, has a wealth of knowledge, but he said he learned something every time he picked up American Legacy. And he was specifically referring to the story that we had published on Major Taylor in the magazine. He had never heard of Major Taylor. And so those kind of comments were common for us to receive throughout the years that we published American Legacy.
And that gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, that telling these stories and celebrating these lives and the accomplishments of people under all kinds of difficult and different circumstances. That's the heart of the matter with Legacy, and it's inspiring as well. I mean, educational is one of those words that you hear it and you go, right, it's good for me, like my oatmeal. But these were great stories and inspiring stories.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of impact, right? A lot of impact that the magazine, the brand overall has made on so many communities. I'm sure all of you have different anecdotes from people that you've encountered. I know I have my own, growing up, going to events or seeing things come out in the magazine. It's like just deeply moving piece of the legacy of the magazine. There's a question that came in from, I guess, the Facebook chat that I wanna put on the table here for us. It reads, super smart to target churches for ALN in the early days. Given the evolution of the media industry from print to digital, has the distribution strategy changed for ALN today? How about for Forbes too? So I should say that we'll definitely touch on this, and I would love to hear y'all's responses to this, because this is a big question. So I do want to put it out there though, to see what y'all have to say about that, in terms of the media industry, obviously going from print to digital, and what the transition has been for American Legacy, but as for Forbes as well. And then how that has impacted the storytelling. I'm going to add how that's impacted the storytelling piece to that question. But let's
Well,
talk
for
about it.
us, I mean, fast forward to 2008, 2009, when the industry was changing. We tried to, we continued to publish the magazine, great stories. People look to it for those inspiring stories. But as things started to change, we had to look at going into 2012. We had to look at how we were going to actually stay in business, and what that was going to look like. And so we had to, start looking at developing a digital oriented product. And we went through a number of different phases in the development of the product that we currently have today. Fortunately, while we were navigating the minefields, we still had some products that we had developed while we were still publishing the magazine, some ancillary products, whether it was our curriculum guide, our Black History curriculum guide, we developed a board game based on the magazine. We had other products. We had our mobile truck exhibit. And so there were other products that we started to kind of, market to our audience and to our advertisers so that we can continue to stay afloat while we decided what we were going to do from a digital standpoint. So, and then we eventually got to where we are today with the development of American Legacy Network, which is a Black History streaming video network.
Yeah. Tim, I want to hear from you about this, but I also want to push you dad a little bit because I want to know a little bit more about when these things came about. I don't know that, I think we just had the screen share of all of the different kind of products or different brands that have been under the American Legacy umbrella. I'm curious as to why those expansions were pushed. I don't remember that they were because of the digital divide, right? I think some of those things came about.
Well, not initially, no.
Right.
We were just at one point looking for different revenue streams to go along with the magazine. We had this fantastic magazine brand, and so we had to think, well, how can we expand our brand into some other areas to create revenue? And so the board game was certainly one of those, and the curriculum. But the biggest thing really was the mobile truck exhibit that we did our first mobile truck exhibit in 2008, and we were able to connect sponsors to that. We also launched a television product called Heritage Moments, which was a syndicated program. So we could then go into an advertiser and say, of course we want you in the magazine, but now we have these other brands available that you can, advertise and support as well. And so that was really, a way for us to expand what we were doing with the magazine and develop those additional revenue streams. And so we didn't wait on the digital divide or the digital transition that had to happen. We were already moving down that road, but I mention it because it was important that we did, because when we stopped publishing the print edition of the magazine, I still had some revenue coming in from some of those ancillary products that kept us alive while we kind of, like I said, navigated the minefields to kind of determine what that digital product was going to look like.
Yeah. I don't know, Tim or Audrey, if you have any response to this kind of point of the conversation about the digital piece and the impact of that.
Well, I left after the print ended, so I don't really have a response to the digital shift. Tim might have a bit more grounding in that.
Well, what Rodney described parallels what happened broadly throughout the industry, and certainly what happened in Forbes. The magazine, Forbes magazine, is still published, but only a handful of issues effectively. This year, I think it's 8 issues. It was born as a bi-weekly magazine in 1917. So it went, gosh, I think, Rodney, when we first met, we were publishing at Forbes 28 issues of Forbes a year, plus a couple of ancillary magazines.
Right.
And gosh, it completely
Wow.
shifted the paradigm. We were also started doing more and more live events. And those events, well, I was going to say today, prior to March, events, last year probably comprised almost a third of the revenue of Forbes. Digital is well over half. And so the magazine now is probably the smallest piece of the revenue drivers at Forbes itself. But so that change has been total. You would ask, JP, you'd asked about how does it change the storytelling and the construction of editorial. It's impacted that enormously at Forbes as it has at Legacy. I mean, when you're doing the live tour with the exhibits, that's still a kind of narrative, but it's not the same as what Audrey was doing, obviously, at the magazine, constructing stories that are meant to be read in a linear way, people wandering through. And in the digital side too, things tend to get more, to put it nicely, I guess, get more compressed, and it's little bits here and bits there, and harder, I think, to tell the kind of full story and with all the nuance that you were able to do typically in print. And it's one can lament that change, but it's the way it is. So you just try to pack as much in as you can.
Right.
And again, a TV is, of course, is a little different than print, or than a live event or an exhibit, a mobile exhibit. But
Yeah, I mean, our
mobile story.
Yeah.
Getting the story out there.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with the mobile exhibit, we are able to tell a great story. And I've seen it time and time again where when people come on board the mobile truck exhibit, whether they're a kindergartner or 95-year-old, there's a wow experience that takes place. The recent tour that we did for the National Hockey League, which we've done for the last 2 years, celebrating 200 years of Black achievement in hockey. I mean, that was a fascinating story to tell in that kind of setting. And then we also recently did one for the CIAA basketball tournament, celebrating their 75th year of that tournament, that basketball tournament. Again, a fascinating story to tell. So we're not telling the same story that we would tell from a print standpoint, but from a mobile experiential standpoint, it was pretty fascinating. And JP had an opportunity this year to actually work on the NHL tour in a number of the cities, and I think he could agree that individuals, when they came on board, they had a great experience.
Absolutely. The live element of experiencing this creative, innovative way to tell stories, as we're talking about, is completely new for folks, and especially on an 18-wheeler truck that's been converted to a museum, right? So it's definitely something different, and it actually also speaks to something too that, again, before the digital era kind of ushered in a new way of distributing things and trying to figure out how to get the stories out. What always struck me with the magazine was the live events, right? The live events that happened even in the 90s, the early 2000s. And I would love to hear what went on to think up those events, to produce those events, kind of the behind the scenes, any stories, right? I'm talking specifically about, like the Women of Strength and Courage Awards, or the Men of Honor and Distinction Awards, or any of the bevy of events. I mean, there were events all over the place happening all the time that were vibrant, right? And I would love to hear some of the insight on what that did for the brand, but also for the culture, right? And I think there's an internal culture, and then there's a culture that I think those events had on even the relationship with Forbes, right? I think there's a relationship that happens, there's an impact that happens from these vibrant events taking place. I would love to hear about that from you all.
Well, I mean, we initially developed events that we could tie advertisers into. I mean, that's that's why we developed the mobile truck exhibit. That's why we developed Women of Strength and Courage, that we could tie advertisers into, that could it would extend, provide them an opportunity to spend more money with our brand. And with Women in Strength and Courage, it was just a great way for us to connect with the community, connect with women. We were bringing in these iconic women to honor them at lunches, and having them participate in a student forum prior to the luncheon. And then it just continued to grow. We then started developing Men of Honor and Distinction, because someone one day said, well, you're always honoring women. Are you ever going to honor men? And so that became another revenue stream for us as well, to have those kinds of events. And then we had an annual healthcare event. And we were always doing events throughout the year. But again, it was tying in advertisers and providing them an opportunity to engage our audience in a live way, not just in the magazine itself, but actually have a relationship with them from a live standpoint. And so we produced a number of events throughout the years. And I think at one event that you attended, JP, you were able to meet Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah.
And, so the exposure, that we were able to provide our attendees at the events, I think were very well received by not only attendees, but I think the advertisers who participated as sponsors received a direct benefit as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, Audrey.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, I got, people were constantly asking me, when's the next legacy event? When is the next legacy event? Are you going to have another event? That was terrific. And they were big and small. One of my favorites, Rodney will remember, is what we would try to do this magazine music issue for the summer issue. And we had, and I don't remember if you were there, Tim, or not, at this particular event, but we had it at the Forbes building in the main area. And it was Odetta came to this, and it was the
Carolina Chocolate Drops.
Yeah, the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And they were both featured in that magazine, and I just had the luck of the draw to be able to get the Chocolate Drops PR person, and he was like, they're going to be in town, and I said, well, Odetta's going to be coming, and so they all came together, and it was a lovely little impromptu concert with the Carolina Chocolate Drops. But it was the big ones, but also those small events where you knew the advertisers were behind there somewhere, but it was more about the organic group of people who were coming together to enjoy Black history and and these kind of smaller events. But
Well, I think Audrey's making a really critical point, and you alluded to it a little bit. Of course, these are opportunities to create packages for sponsors that include print, events, and then digital things subsequently. But the only reason any of them work is if they are authentic to the brand and resonate authentically with the brand and with the community that the brand is already serving. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And
Right.
these events did.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That, I mean, this is what kind of like littered my raising, my upbringing, right? Is literally being in these spaces where there was so much history, so many makers of history, so much legacy building, and it was, that was like you said, Audrey. It's like, when's the next one? when's the next one that we're having? And the thing interesting too, like even just thinking about it from a distribution standpoint, right? Like the magazine was quarterly, right? It came out once a quarter, and these events, in a lot of ways, I would imagine supplemented, the space in between those quarterly, those quarterly publishings. And it's hard to think now, because the world moves so fast, that a successful magazine could come out 4 times a year. And I would also love to hear, and I don't know who we have looking or listening to the call right now, but I would even love to hear like that decision. And I have an idea what the response may be, but why quarterly? That's something I always grew up asking. Why does it only come out once every quarter? Why doesn't it come out more? What's going on? Like the other. This is a magazine that talks about history. No other magazines really talk about history. This is educational. Like what's going on here? I would love to hear some of that as well. Just some of those decisions, and as basic as they even may be, but I would love to hear some of that banter.
Well, I think we looked at what we felt the market would bear, being that it was a Black history, basically a Black history oriented product. How often could we go? We knew from an advertising standpoint how many pages we would need to make it work, and quarterly just seemed like the perfect schedule in order to achieve that. Could we do it quarterly versus trying to spread it out, and publish more issues, but have less advertising, So, initially, I think our spring issue or February issue was always initially it was the largest issue, but eventually, that shifted. And sometimes our summer issue would be the largest issue from an advertising standpoint, or sometimes it was our fall issue or our winter issue. So, we had to do, and I think we did a great job in developing relationships with advertisers across the board, to get them to want to have a presence in the magazine on an ongoing basis. Now, would they have done that 8 times or 10 times a year? Don't know, but it worked. It worked from a quarterly standpoint, and so that's how we kind of built it out. And then, they also, like you said earlier, by having the various events, we stayed top of mind with our audience, because we always had something that we were distributing or having, or whether it was an issue. And then we also developed some supplements. We developed American Legacy Woman that came out, and we polybagged it with the core magazine. We developed a kids product, American Legacy Junior. We developed Healthcare Advantage, because that was a big ad category for us. And so we expanded in that arena. And then we did another supplement, Trailblazers. So we were able to, although we were publishing American Legacy quarterly, we were able to publish other supplements that would come out through the year that gave us the presence of being around all year long.
Can I also just jump in and add that Debbie's genealogy workshops were a
Mm,
big draw and helped us really reach out to our readers.
That's right.
Aside from, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So many moving parts, right? I mean, that's the thing that was so tremendous about it. And another piece that I'll bring up too, another behind the scenes piece is the fact that this was still a small business, right? This was something that was engineered by not that many people. And I remember, going to the office and thinking there were way more people who would have been at like the American Legacy spot. I'm like, wait, there's like 80 y'all. Like, how is this working,
Well,
right? Like,
well, I need to jump in and say that heritage was a big part of it too. So if you
yes.
only saw the legacy spot, you might think that, but it
Mm,
expanded to, the production and all of that.
mm,
So there were more
yes.
than it met the eye. Yep.
Yes, yes, there was a huge partnership, right? It was my dad always described it as a joint venture, right? It was a thing that was collaborative and joint, which is a big piece of it as well. Um, we have another question from the Facebook chat, and this is it's funny because we've been talking about kind of filling in the gaps in terms of the quarterly piece and the events and finding different ways to reach different parts of your audience, but to also keeping in alignment with the integrity of the brand, as Tim mentioned earlier. One of the questions is that so many people write to say that they missed the magazine, right? They missed the print version of the magazine, and I know that there's a lot of that. So there are folks who are still wondering, how to fill the gap. What are the ways that the brand is currently filling the gaps? What are the ways that the magazine wants to be filling the gap? How can we be filling the gap?
Well, one of the things that we constantly receive is letters and emails um, all the time from people who ask about the magazine. Matter of fact, I received one a couple of weeks ago from someone who had said that she was holding on to our spring 2000 issue, and she was hoping that additional issues. Actually, here's the letter right here. Came in August 21st, and
Wow.
she talked about really saluting us for our work, but wanting to know how she could possibly uh, come in contact with more editions of American Legacy. And I had to unfortunately let her know that we don't have any more print editions, but we receive um, those kinds of letters and comments, almost on a daily basis in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Mm,
Currently, our attention and our um, efforts have been into growing American Legacy Network, which, as I indicated, is a Black History streaming video network that showcases classic Black films, um, Black history documentaries, original programming, some contemporary kinds of programming for our audience. It's a different business model than the print, but it still allows us to um, share our history in a different manner, in a different vehicle, so to speak. And then the other thing is really a lot of attention and has been growing for us has been, and we've actually developed a partnership called ALX Mobile, which is a mobile experiential component of the business now because, for years, and I may have mentioned that we launched our first tour in 2008, was a 20 city tour that went to in 30 days. And so through the years, all of the tours really were promoting the American Legacy brand. But about 4 years ago, we got into really extending that side of the business and working with some of our partners to develop specific mobile experiential experiences for them. And so we've worked with Toyota on a couple of different mobile truck tours. We've done two mobile exhibit tours for the National Hockey League with the CIAA, and we have a host of other things that we're currently working on right now. So, and then we're also looking really to expand distribution, because we always receive comments and questions in regards to our board game. We actually sold out of our board game about a year ago. And so we're looking at, different ways of expanding the distribution of that. We've sold probably close to about 12,000 copies of that board game organically. We haven't done a big advertising campaign, but, when we put it out, people purchase it. And then we're looking at expanding distribution of our Black History curriculum, and possibly doing that from a digital aspect as well. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on currently, but all still celebrating Black history and culture.
Yeah, definitely still in alignment. The integrity is still there in terms of the storytelling aspect. It's been a really amazing journey to see the shift of how the storytelling is happening, or where the storytelling is happening. But it's definitely still happening. I've gotten a couple more questions from Facebook, and it's along similar lines, right? Like, when the magazine comes back, how can we get more PDF versions of all the issues? Like, how can we get it? And it's drawing upon me. I got Audrey Peterson on the line right now, and I'm like, I would love to hear. I would love to hear. Like, there's so many stories that y'all touched. So many, folks that you were in contact with to get these stories out. One thing that strikes me, there've been other products created from stories that were in the magazine, right? People were inspired to create things based on stories in the magazine. I would love to know, Audrey, what is a story that you worked on that's just so memorable that makes you light up when you think about it?
Wow, there's just so many. Well, there's the ones that I wrote, and I think we're going to talk about one of them in particular that Tim has a connection to. We can go ahead and talk about that, because that's what really got me started writing at American Legacy, because I had come on and I was the editor. And so, I'm collecting the manuscripts and doing all of that, but I hadn't done any writing yet. So actually, that was the first story I wrote for American Legacy. And it was about the art at a collection at the HBCU Tougaloo College. And what was intriguing about it was that Tim's alma mater, Brown, was connected to Tougaloo. And Tim, would you like to discuss a little bit more about that, or?
Well, sure. Brown, indeed, from mid-60s and still does today, has had a relationship, as you observed, with Tougaloo. And I had a relationship with Brown through the board there for over 20 years. And through that connection, then I became involved with Tougaloo, and was on that board for 6 years, and traveled down to Mississippi a few times a year for board meetings and such. And it was, to me, not surprisingly, given my background and given the world I grew up in, it was eye-opening and inspiring in a very different way than the Legacy. But these kids, most of whom were first-generation college students, first in their families to go to college, and one just was absolutely struck and overwhelmed by their enthusiasm for learning, their ambition, and their desire to make their way in the world and to find their own place and success in the world. And it was and is a great institution, and for me, a great experience to be associated with. for sure.
The story itself, that what was intriguing to me is that a German professor had come to Tougaloo during really pretty much in the beginning of the modern civil rights era, in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and had come there as a German professor, but decided, he could also be an art professor. He was also an artist, so he decided to, Professor Shell, put together an art department out of his own pocket. Part of the issue was that he was white and he was teaching at a Black institution of higher learning, and there were certain folks in Mississippi who were not very happy with it. So he got death threats. It was difficult for him to be a white professor in this school, but then he overcame that and put together an art department, an art class, and had students in it, and they'd have to sneak the students out to go to New York because it was, they were not segregated. This was an integrated bus of students going up to New York, where he wanted to show them all the great artworks and things like that. What was really, really interesting about the whole story is that he helped save great artworks from artists who had come to Tougaloo, African American artists who had come to Tougaloo to create art, to do, to be there in their studio, and for some reason it was being cleared out or whatever, but they were in the dumpster, and he happened to see it, and he pulled out these great artworks out of the dumpster, and then proceeded to figure out how they could be preserved and saved, and so forth. And I think that's a great metaphor for what Rodney established and what we did with the magazine.
Yeah.
So my very first story was a complete metaphor of what my job.
I'd forgotten that story.
Yeah.
So thank you for reminding me. And also thank you for pointing out what I think is the best part of the fact that American legacy exists today and after 25 years is the extraordinary entrepreneurship of the founder to undertake it, of course, to begin with, but also to persevere, and through incredible tumult in what started again, JP, you've been talking about this from the beginning of this conversation, the changes from publishing a magazine to doing all of these other activities while remaining true to a core vision, which again, it was what attracted me to support the endeavor from the get-go, was this notion of inspiring people by telling the stories of other people who succeeded and endured and survived, thrived, and to my mind, that is the story, is inspiring people. And if you believe in the power of individuals to do things, and Rodney's a living example of that, as you are as well, Audrey. But it in and of itself is a great story, to my mind.
There's a great.
One of the stories that I think about a lot is the fact that, the Great Debaters story that we published in the magazine in 1997 actually became a feature film in 1987. And that I always thought that was pretty amazing. And so I used to tell people that we had in American Legacy 100 of the great debater kinds of stories that could be turned into feature films. And actually, I actually had a script written on Bessie Coleman, America's first Black aviator, that I'm trying to sell to Hollywood. So, but
The
it's just
entrepreneurial spirit does not die.
it has. Well, you know, I've been real fortunate because I have two sons who are millennials, and so they've helped me adjust to the digital curve, you know, so to speak. And so my learning curve was shortened because of their involvement in a number of the things that I'm doing today. And so I'm real fortunate because I was just thinking, you know, JP was 7 and Joshua was 6 when we started working on American Legacy in 1994. And when we published it in 1995, you know, they were 6 and 7 years old. So that's pretty amazing in itself that a
Why
7-year-old.
did you have to go date us all this way?
I'm wearing mine with courage. I'm taking every day.
Oh man. Listen, this is a great conversation. I think we may be close to the time we have allotted for the conversation. I mean, we've talked about the foundation of the brand, starting with the magazine, the relationship with Forbes, the really powerful approach to storytelling, and the integrity with which this brand has remained committed to that kind of lesser known story, but big stories. We've talked about even like the future of the brand, and I would love to kind of end this call with hearing from each of you, if you can remember, you know, your favorite cover from the magazine, if you have one, your favorite magazine cover, because the covers were always hit for me personally, right? So if you can come up with your favorite cover, and I'll give you mine too, and then I would love to hear word from what you hope for the future of the brand, because it is still existing and it's transitioned and it's still alive. So I would love to hear from you all about what you see coming forward. We talked about ALX Mobile, the mobile experiential kind of part of the brand. We talked about American Legacy Network and the television kind of component of the brand that's continuing. So I would love to hear from y'all, you know, what you may see coming down the pike. So for me, I'll start to give y'all a second to think about your favorite cover. For me, it's a tie, and it's a definite tie. The Muhammad Ali cover with boxing underwater, and then the Isaac Hayes cover, which was the music kind of cover. He's just in all his funk glory, you know, the heavy chain swinging. Isaac Hayes just swag drippy was my favorite covers. And I'm looking forward to see what happens with American Legacy Mobile, right? I got a taste of the tour. The tour not only tells the story of the magazine and the stories from the magazine, but also, you know, other lesser known stories that I'm looking forward to see what other things come to life, what other stories get a chance to come to life from this new way of storytelling and experience, and kind of getting the narrative out. So those are things that I'm looking forward to. I love to hear from y'all. And then I'll say this now for folks to stay tuned. There's a bunch of different conversations that are happening for the 25th celebration, the celebration of the 25th anniversary. And then always, you know, you can go to AmericanLegacyNetwork.tv and check out what's going on over there. So for all the folks tuned in, check those things out. And I'll leave the floor for our hosts to give us a little sign off with the favorite cover. I love to end with the favorite cover piece.
Well, you stole mine. It was the Muhammad Ali cover. And I used to always tell people, you know, there was that James Bond movie when Halle Berry came out of the water and she walked up. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was a James Bond movie. And so I used to tell people that cover was our Halle Berry cover. You know, I love that particular cover. But, you know, if you go down the line, we had so many great covers
Yeah.
throughout the years that we published. There were so many, but I did that particular cover with Muhammad Ali was probably one of my favorites.
That was going to be my cover, my choice too. So, but
Oh,
but there are so many. I mean, there's this fabulous one of Sammy Davis Jr. that I always loved.
mm,
I like because we published two covers for the 70s issue, as you remember. Isaac
And that was
Hayes,
Peggy. That was Peggy Bean's idea.
right? And yes, and then the woman with the afro,
the
and that
Afro.
I loved that. And we found her too. She wrote in, and we
Ah.
found out who she was, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
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 I remember actually I think you all did a survey to see which cover was better.
Yes, we did.
From like the readers. And I think the
Yeah.
woman with the Afro won that survey. Like
Yes, we
I
did.
think she won that. Yeah.
She did.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good time.
So Tim,
So I'm going to give you a little different answer.
okay.
The first cover, and that's because
Mm.
and that's because it meant legacy was real,
Yeah.
not just
Mm.
Rodney's dream.
There it is.
Wow. There
Yeah,
it
not
is.
just
Wow.
not just a dream. I mean, look at that image.
Yeah.
It's it
That's
captures.
beautiful. Yeah.
It is. It's a beautiful picture, and just a beautiful image set. It's an imagery that's beautiful, but it's really that it was. It meant that legacy was real.
That's
That
right.
it still
Yeah.
exists 25 years later in different form is a great thing, and one which you all should be so tremendously proud of, as I am to be by association. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for having this conversation. Thank you for everybody who's tuned in on Facebook. Thank you for the questions that you submitted via the chat. This has been rich. This has been really fulfilling. And again, thank you to the founder, Rodney J. Reynolds. Thank you to Audrey Peterson,
Thank you.
former editor. Thank you to Timothy Forbes, former partner. And thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for the work that you've done, right? Sincere gratitude for that work. This is a real thing and it's still living.
Yes, it is.
And then it is a legacy of its own. So, I just want to throw that in there as well. And for all the folks watching again, please remember to stay tuned for the rest of the celebration of the 25th anniversary. We have a bunch of different conversations with current producers coming up within the next week, over the course of the next week. Conversation with producers who are producers with American Legacy Network. So different shows, different offerings that are still currently available. American Legacy Network. Follow American Legacy Network on all of the social media platforms. Make sure you subscribe to American Legacy TV, American Legacy Network.tv, classic Black films, original programming from producers that you will have conversations with over the next week. And we're gonna keep this thing going, and we'll see you at the 50th. It'll be a little different at the 50th. We'll see you at the 50th. But thanks again, and I hope everybody has a really blessed evening. And thanks again for the conversation, y'all.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you,
Tim.
all. To be with
Thank
to
you,
see you
Audrey.
all
Great
too.
seeing you.
Yeah.
Yep.